Hiya Nine. I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about an option that you have to take at GCSE level that you didn't take in Key Stage 3, and that's GCSE Geology. And now GCSE Geology is all about the study of the history of the Earth, the 4.6 billion year history of the Earth, and how we unravel things that have happened in the past. So just to give you a little bit of information on why I got into geology and how that was a subject that I started to study. Well, that's me as a very young man many years ago with a lot more hair. And that's my grandfather. Now, unfortunately, my grandfather died when I was 6 years old, but he's the person who really instilled in me a love of geology. And he used to take me collecting down in West Wales. We used to go fossil hunting and things in West Wales. And I've got these two samples, which I still keep with me today. They're my two most precious samples. One of them contains these small cubes of a gold-coloured mineral, and one of them contains these tiny little creatures preserved in the rock. They're both in the same rock type, but those really got me fascinated in geology. Why are those gold cubes there? Where have they come from? How are those creatures preserved inside the rock, and where did they come from? And that's what geology is all about, really, unraveling the past. So what does geology do for us? Well, if we don't get things, if we don't grow things or farm things, then we get them from the ground. So pretty much all of our resources, our energy resources, our building materials, things that we use to create products, all of those pretty much come from the ground, okay, or come from resources originally from the ground. And it's geologists who have to find those. So in terms of the course, we study 6 main things in the course. Number 1 is we look at the geomaterials, the things that make up the Earth. What's the Earth made of? So we've got minerals, we've got the various rock types, we've got fossils preserved in the ground. We then look at plate tectonics and hazards. So the structure of the Earth then, how does that create hazards on the surface? How do the plates move? What sort of hazards does that create? We then look at planetary geology. So we compare the Earth to the other terrestrial planets, the other solid rocky planets, and what can we learn about those and the history of those planets, or the history of the Earth, from studying each of those. We then look at geological structures. So what are the features created underground from processes? So folding, faulting, various types of structures. Then in year 11, we look at Earth history in quite a lot of detail. So what can we unravel from what's trapped inside the rocks about the history of the Earth? So the evolution of dinosaurs, other creatures, and we look then at how those link to environments today. And then finally, we look at resources and engineering. So this is where a lot of the jobs in geology are. So we look at how we gather resources from the ground and what jobs and roles geologists take in finding those resources. So the key thing in geology really is this phrase, the present is the key to the past. So how do we interpret rocks that might be a few 100 million years old? Well, we look at clues today. So geologists are detectives really looking at clues. So a rock, a fairly simple rock called red sandstone. Well, where do you find red sand today? In deserts. So that rock probably formed in deserts. Look at a fossil of a creature. Now, how do we interpret how that creature lived? Well, we look at creatures that are similar. So that's a reptile. So we look at reptiles today, but actually in terms of its body, that creature is closer to birds today. So we can look at how birds live. Then we can look at things like faults. How do those create those big cracks in the ground? By looking at how faults occur today in earthquakes. And then we can compare features on other planets with features on the Earth. So Olympus Mons, a giant mountain on Mars, is similar in its shape, not size, but shape, to Mount Vesuvius, a volcano on Earth. So it's probably a volcano. And then how will you be assessed? Well, if 50% is on an on-screen exam paper, so it's on-screen questions where you type the answers into the computer, allowing nice images and maps to be shown. And then 50% is on a practical exam where you have samples, a map of a real location and photographs, and you interpret the geology and history from that. So we do lots of field trips, 2 field trips in year 10 to local places, and then a 2-day trip where we stay overnight to Pembrokeshire to study the geology, because geology, at the end of the day, is a practical field-based subject. And then finally, geology is a subject that brings together lots of elements of science and geography and other interpretive subjects. And lots of students say how much they enjoy the subject. So students in year 10, 11, 12, and 13, and they talk a lot about the practical elements, how you have to interpret things, and it's a very interesting subject in that sense. And then we've got a number of students from the past who've gone on to work in the geological field. So Richard works for a mining company in Russia. Tom works for a drilling and mining company in South America. Laura works for the British Geological Survey, mapping rocks in different parts of the world. Steve and Martin, they both work. Steve set up his own company, sort of working with building with rocks, etc. And Martin works as an explosives expert in and geologist in a mine and quarry in Australia. So lots of former students have gone on to things. So in terms of jobs, huge range of jobs are related to geology. So we've got environmental science, paleontology, flood control, mapping, engineering jobs, drilling, energy industries, planetary science, volcanology, all of those related to geology. So it's definitely a subject where people who take the subject tend to find they find it very, very interesting. So hopefully there's something in it for you. Thank you.